Hi there, welcome to part 2 of this lesson on validating model objects within Spring Boot. In this one, we're going to take our validation to a little bit higher level and introduce a new type of field that we might store on our model classes. So far, we've only stored strings. We've looked at a name string and a description string, and we were able to validate those based on some basic annotations. You're often going to want to store more complicated fields on your objects. Okay, so you might have a reference to another object, you might have a numeric field, etc. So let's look at a specific case of that right now. Let's look at adding a type field on our class here. And what I mean by that is, suppose that the user were able to select the type of cheese that they were adding within the application as they were adding it. So the type of cheese might be, hard, soft, aged cheese, etc. Just like some specific categorical piece of information about the data they are entering. And the first approach you might take to doing that is to make that a string field. So you might say that you have a private string field that has the name type. This is not a great way to do this, because if you were to think about the user going to the forum to create a new cheese, even if we were to set a bunch of validation annotations on this, they still could essentially type whatever they wanted to, right? If you really wanted your data to be nice and clean and meaningful, something like this that's a categorical field should only have one of a few types of values, right? So you wouldn't want the user to be able to type in, say, I don't know, apple for the type of cheese, right? Because that just wouldn't make sense. There's a way to do that using a new Java construct that we've just learned. Okay, so if you haven't read the tutorial on Enum classes in Java, go back to the prep work. It was listed just before this video in the prep work. Go back and do that first, because we're about to use them. All right, so let's go create our first Enum. In our models package, go to right click and create a new Java class. Let's call it cheese type. And here, I want to replace the word class with Enum. Okay, and Enum is a special type of class. Enum is just short for enumeration, and enumeration is just a fancy word for a listing. And so this is going to be a class that only can have one of a few values from a list. And so let's list the values that we want our cheese type class to be able to have. I'm going to say that I want to be able to create hard cheeses and soft cheeses and fake cheeses. Okay, so now within this class, or within my program rather, I could use this cheese type class as follows. So instead of a string, I can declare this. And Enum defines a type, just like every other class does. And I can use it right here. Okay, and say I wanted to initialize this in line just to show you how we can use the class. I can say cheese type dot hard is the default. So to reference one of the values of the Enum, this is the syntax. It kind of looks similar to accessing a static member of a class, but you say cheese type dot hard. And I didn't mention this before, but the convention for Enums is that when you specify the values that your Enum class should have, the Java convention is to make those all caps. Okay, so that's how you can create an Enum type and add it to another class. Our Enum types are going to be slightly more useful if we are going to display them. They'll be slightly more useful if we can add a little bit more functionality to them. So let's do that now. Currently, if I want to go print this out on the screen, I would just get the word hard in all caps. That's not great. Okay, so let's look at how we can add additional fields to an Enum. So essentially what I want to do is create a name field that can be used as a more or less display name for our Enum. So to do that, I need to end my list with a semicolon, and then let me create a private string name field, and then I want to create a constructor to initialize that. Okay, and just a couple of notes here. My field is private. I'm initializing in the constructor. It actually should be private final. Okay, our fields within our enums, if we have, say, a hard or a soft enum, these are going to represent specific objects of our enum type. Once we initialize them, we don't want them to be changed. So we want all of their fields to be final. And then my constructor should be, should not be a public constructor. It should have the default access level. Okay, and so this will allow an enum to be created with a string name, which we'll use as the display name. In order to call this constructor, I need to basically call the constructor up here. So I basically need to just add this syntax. So this is a little unusual. It's definitely different from most of the Java stuff we've seen so far, but it will start to sink in once you use it. Enums are pretty nice to work with once you get used to them. So this says that I have 3 different types of cheeses, 3 different values that this cheese type class can have. It can be equal to this hard value, which will have a private final string equal to this. It will have the soft value and the fake value with their corresponding private final strings that are set by calling the constructor here where I declare the values. Okay, so this is going to be much more useful to us, and we'll see in a few moments when we're looking at using enums in our view. Okay, so I'm going to wipe this out because we're going to go ahead and now set the type of our cheeses through our view and controller. So if we go back to our controller, let's look at any more work we might have to do here. And there really isn't any, to be honest, right now at least. We'll get to some work in a second, but when I'm going to create this form, I'm just going to pass in a new cheese object. That cheese object has a type on it. When I'm checking this, the error checking will take place. We'll see that since we're going to use a select, the error checking is actually going to be pretty easy. Let's go ahead and go to the add view form and look at what we might do here. I want to add a new form input to allow the user to select the cheese. Okay, so down here, let's create a new div class form group. I'm just using the Bootstrap classes here to make my form look a little bit nicer. And then I'm going to create a label, th4. This is going to be for the type property of my class. And then here I want to create a select, right? Remember, a select is just a drop down that allows the user to pick from a set of options. And I want this to be for the type property of my class. Recall that when we're inside this form, we've scoped this form basically to say that we're going to work with the cheese class that was passed in. This empty cheese class is going to serve as a template for the form elements that we're creating here. Okay, so this says that when the user selects something out of this dropdown, I want that to go to the type property of my cheese when it's bound in the model. So how do I generate this list of options? Okay, so this is where we need to go back to our controller and do a little bit more work. When I'm getting ready to create this form, I pass in a new cheese class, right? But that can only potentially, even if we were to set a default option, that could only potentially hold one cheese type. It couldn't hold all of the various cheese types. So I need to actually pass in a new object, and I'm going to call this cheese types. And this is going to be cheese type.values. And cheese type.values, you can see, will return an array of cheese types. And that will just be all of the values of that enum class. Okay, so this will be an array with 3 things in it. It will have a hard thing, a soft thing, and a fake thing. Each of those 3 specific objects that are the possible values of a cheese type will be passed in an array. And then I can use this array in my view. Okay, so here I need to create options, right? I use the option tag to specify options in the dropdown that can be used. And so I want to do this by using a loop in timeleaf, th each. And I'm going to say for each type in, well, let me be a little bit better about this. Let me say each cheese type in cheese types. Right here I use the $sign because cheese types is not a property of the class that I've scoped my form to, right? This is the difference between the $sign and the asterisk. And then for each of those, I want to say th text equals, what do I want to display for those options? Well, this is the reason I created the name field on these guys. And actually I need a getter for this if I want to display it. So let me create a public string get name, return name. Now I can actually get that in my form by saying cheese type dot name. And of course I need to wrap that. So that will be the display for each item. The value, I'm going to say th:value. This will be the value that's submitted in the form data that's sent to the server. And this should actually be the cheese type itself, the actual enum type. Okay? So to revisit all the things we've done here, by saying th field, this says that the user selection from this dropdown should be bound to the type property of the cheese class. In other words, we've scoped our form to be relevant to the cheese class. This says bound the selection to the type property. And we've generated the list of possible options here using this enum type and looping over all of these. And we got the list of all of them using cheese type.values. So let's go ahead and start up our server. I'm going to start it in debug mode and see if this works. While this is starting up, I'm going to, in order to see that this works, I'm going to come down here and just set a breakpoint where I'm adding the new cheese to the data store. So that the first time we submit this, we'll see what happens. Okay, so let's go to our add form. Oh, looks like we have an error there. Let's come and check this out. Invalid property type of bean class cheese. This looks like I just did something wrong within my cheese class. And this looks like I created this, but I didn't create getters and setters for it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come down to the bottom and right click and generate getter and setter for the cheese type. Okay. And then now I need to restart my server. So basically what happened there is within my form, when I say that I want to access the type attribute of something, this uses the getter for that attribute. Okay, so it's not able to actually access that attribute unless I expose it by providing a getter. All right, there we go. So we still have our name and description, but we have a third input here now that's a select. And notice that I have three options here: hard, soft, and fake. And let me just do a little bit more. I'm going to open up my browser developer tools and inspect this element and show you what these options look like. Notice that the values are equal to basically what the enum values are, right? These all cap names. And the actual text associated with them is equal to the name that we provided by giving it that human readable name, that more friendly name in the enum class, okay? So let's go ahead and try to fill this out. Let's make a new cheese. Cheddar cheese is probably, it's more a hard cheese than a soft cheese. And let's say add. All right, so my debugger caught here at the breakpoint. And let's just look at what we've got. So our new cheese, this was passed in via model binding. Let's inspect it. And we see that it has a type field, and that is equal to hard. It's the cheese type. And we can look and see just specifically in there exactly what we've got. But we see that that did seem to work properly. Okay, notice that you can also see the errors in model object. These are things we've been working with. You can also see these in the debugger and see that we don't have any errors. There's 0 errors. So this errors object will still exist. If you have errors, it just will be empty. And so that looks like everything worked. Let's play this out. and remove the breakpoint. And if I come back here, I see that while I created that object just fine, I didn't display it very well. So let's go back to our index view and just make this one last update. Index, and I need to add a new column to display the type. Okay, and down here I can say th:\text, and I just want to use the name. First I want to access the type property of my cheese, and then I want to access off that the name property. The name property is the human readable one. The display, the other one's human readable. I've been saying that. I guess the other one's human readable. It's just not very pretty. And this will access the name property using the getter on the cheese type that is associated with the given cheese. All right, let's go back. We don't need to restart our server since we only changed the view. And there we go. So that was created and displayed appropriately. So you're going to encounter a lot more, variations on these types of situations and more complexities and so forth. It's impossible for us to present all of the different ways that you might want to create fields and create your model objects and work with them in forms. So we don't want to pretend like we've taught you everything that you'll ever need to know about doing this in Spring Boot, but we did want to show you some of the most basic, most useful ways to do it. And now you have the tools to pick up others and additional ones relatively simply as you go forward. All right, so that's it for this lesson, and happy coding.